Global 360, the show produced by the Washington Diplomat, which for over 25 years has served as the premier source of information for the diplomatic community here in Washington, D.C. We want to thank our sponsors, Cigna, a health services company that operates worldwide, as well as Sahori Insurance, which has been serving the diplomatic community for over 50 years. I am the Diplomat's managing editor, Anna Gavell, and I have my esteemed co-host, political analyst Eric Ham. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Anna. Welcome, everyone.
Yep. And we are a day away from the election. How are you feeling, Eric?
I'm feeling anxious. You walk, you can't help. I mean, we're in the nation's capital. And you walk around downtown and you see all of the buildings that are boarded up, and you get the sense that people are bracing for something. And so it's just this sense of danger, just something ominous is lurking. Halloween was just a few days away, but it feels like, tonight or perhaps tomorrow night is like the real fright night. So
I love it. I mean, well, I don't love it. And I think that's like the bipartisan feeling, anxious. That's
yeah, exactly.
That's a good way. And we've been excited and exhausted up until this process, and then we still haven't even gotten to the meat of the process. So
right.
Lots to talk about in the coming days and weeks, but so with this webcast, I think we have come in an odd way for full circle to the country that I think has obviously haunted this presidency since day one. Speaking of, we talked about how it's crazy how 2020 has consumed this news cycle. We had an impeachment not that long ago. I mean, only the third president, U.S. president, being impeached. I mean, that is like a distant memory, even though it's not. I mean, it just shows how crazy this news cycle is. But with regards to Russia, obviously don't want to rehash 4 years, but I think it's important to kind of mention something at the beginning. President Trump campaigned explicitly on a pledge to engage with Vladimir Putin and improve relations with Russia. And now, obviously, he was facing a lot of institutional pushback, especially among Congress, especially after the annexation of Crimea. But, I don't think we can say that this was some ludicrous proposition. I mean, you had President Obama's famously failed reset with Russia. George W. Bush said he saw, soul in the eyes of Putin. So, I mean, even though Trump really is a foreign policy at the time novice, I mean, certainly a lot of foreign policy experts would say that talking to your adversary is a very smart, strategic move. But it's all about the execution. And I think here we have what I would say is the two biggest failures on this note of the Trump administration. One was North Korea. I mean, it was an interesting and exciting idea to just, cut to the chase and have the two heads of state meet. But, that was all really show and no substance. Since then, North Korea has, continued its missile development program. And I think it showed the value of having that diplomatic legwork before the heads of state meet. And then I think for very different reasons, Russia is certainly the other example. Now, again, I don't think we want to go down the rabbit hole of, names, Flynn, Giuliani, Carter Page, we'll get to Hunter, lots of Russian operatives whose name we can't pronounce. But, stepping back, to me, I see these kind of three scenarios, if you will. On one extreme, you have President Trump and his supporters talking about a deep state of government officials, of media, mail carriers, of, perpetuating this Russia hoax. To me, the president did not have his October surprise with this unmasking allegations against the Obama administration. I think what's interesting is, even going back, I mean, it's been well reported that the Obama administration had, a lot of information about Russian interference in the 2016 election, and it hedged to make a lot of that public because it didn't look like it was being favorable to Hillary Clinton. So I mean, that right there is kind of an odd deep state thing that people forget. Although, Trump has legitimately criticized Obama of, if you had this information, perhaps you should have done more. But the other big one to me is FBI Director Comey with the bombshell right before the election of bringing up Hillary's emails again, which nothing came of it. But to this day, Democrats blame that for her loss. So, these deep state conspiracies sometimes just seem odd with what really happened in the months leading up to the 2016 election. Now, on the flip side, you have the theories that Russia has, the goods on Trump, the compranon. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but and a lot of these are these salacious details that have never really been proven. Of course, there's the financial aspect, and unless Trump actually releases his taxes, we really will never know if there's some kind of financial connection with Russia. But then I think you also have this kind of in the middle of those things, and usually I find the truth is somewhere in the middle, which is kind of simply that President Trump, and I've lost my train of thought, but President Trump, it was simply his style to approach Russia. He wasn't a politician. I mean, that's what he ran on. He's not a typical businessman. So somebody asked, hey, should WikiLeaks, release dirt on Hillary? Sure. He's not bound by kind of the typical political protocols. And I mean, in fact, he won because he's not. And, I think this was very much reflected in the Mueller report. The report, did not find sufficient evidence of a kind of coordinated conspiracy of collusion. Although it did find various, contacts. I mean, whether it was coordinated because the transition team was uncoordinated, I don't know. But, ultimately it did find 10 episodes of obstruction of justice. To me, though, this was the biggest fallacy of the Mueller report. Right off the bat, Robert Mueller was never going to issue a verdict on guilt or not guilt, or whether to prosecute. He went by a DOJ precedent that that's not your place, that you present the evidence and you leave it to Congress. But the minute the report came out, Trump seized on it, William Barr seized on it to say, look, we've been exonerated of obstruction of justice as well. When the truth is, he didn't issue a verdict one way or another. It was left to Congress. So I don't know. I feel like that's a classic example where once it's done, the narrative has been sealed and it's very hard to go back. I mean, what do you think, Eric? Do you think that was something that got overlooked in the immediate aftermath of the report?
It's interesting that you should bring that up, because I do believe that is something, because we have to remember, it was not Robert Mueller who actually announced the findings of his report. It was initially, it was the Attorney General, William Barr, who did that. And I remember being on the air and we got this memo from William Barr that talked about the findings of the report. And that memo was very different from the actual report, because when the report itself came out and you actually read it, the report was pretty jaw-dropping in what it actually found in terms of not only the GRU and what they did to engage in the election and how involved they were, but also the role of and the level that Mueller laid out in terms of the things that were done by Trump and those around Trump, and this issue of obstruction of justice, which was very clear that now this was a document that Congress, even off that, could have in fact used to begin an impeachment process, but they did not. And so I think that was something that was very telling, because we saw both what Mueller said in this report and then how William Barr described this very report were literally night and day.
Yeah. And then, of course, we eventually did have the impeachment. It was very much party line. It was very predictable. but it certainly revealed the interesting Ukraine nuggets, and whether you believe it was a direct quid pro quo. And I know you've written about this. Many very experienced diplomats pointed out, at a minimum, it was a pressure campaign of for Ukraine's new president to, in return for military aid, basically dig up dirt on the Bidens. Here's my kind of what's always struck me about the Hunter Biden controversy is we have covered Ukraine over the years, including when this was under Biden's portfolio. The prosecutor that Biden, criticized, it was a very standard criticism that the EU echoed, IMF, World Bank, that this prosecutor was corrupt. One of the reasons was specifically he was failing to investigate companies like Burisma, which Hunter on the board where Hunter sat on. So in a sense, Biden was actually pushing for the company to be investigated for corruption. I mean, so right there, the whole, everything that sprouted says to me just, it doesn't have a lot of legs to stand on.
That's the irony of this. Yeah, that's the whole irony. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why people, this prosecutor was despised by most Western institutions for being corrupt himself and letting companies in Ukraine get away with corruption. So, that's one of the interesting kind of conspiracy
if I can just interject real quickly, I think that goes to like the epitome of what you want from a public servant. The fact that he was willing to cross that line, recognizing his son serving on the board, he's receiving, these lucrative payments, but that is not stopping not only this public servant and Joe Biden, who at the time was the vice president, but it was also in line with what so many of the U.S.'s Western allies wanted, was for increased pressure on this individual. And so I think what we saw here was the process and the individuals actually do their job and do it correctly.
Yeah. And, this was also during the time roughly when Joe Biden's other son had died. He had really, bigger things on his plate, I think. But obviously, listen, Hunter Biden, getting one of these cushy jobs was probably neither smart nor very savory. But, for President Trump to latch on to this concept of children becoming enriched with, political ties and ties to some questionable foreign entities, is in and of itself a bit rich. And I think this gets to my point where President Trump is a master of deflection. Now, you can certainly take that as a criticism. You could also take it as a compliment. Eric, you and I both know that pretty much all politicians, all diplomats are well versed in the art of deflection. this is something I think every journalist knows. And Trump has really used it to his advantage in terms of corruption. Such a litany of corruption scandals. Going back to, Secret Service being overcharged for staying at his properties. Most recently, we have so many things, but we've become numb to it of, 300 million taxpayer funded ad campaign to paint a rosy picture of how the president's, handling a pandemic, companies, linked to Trump getting lucrative government contracts, all of this. But then, people grow numb to it. And in part because you have these really outlandish, usually false tweets that has us in the media running around of, Bin Laden's not really dead, a TV anchor accusing him of murder. He has successfully had us running around chasing our tails now for years. And we're still talking about Hillary's emails to this day. She's not in office. How much has it been? Tens of millions of dollars, tens of thousands of pages? And, again, this obscures that there have been very serious national security breaches under the administration. You had, whether it was a rookie mistake, you had, when he was with the Japanese prime minister. You had like missile plans laid out of North Korea at Mar-a-Lago, not the Situation Room. I mean, there's so many of these that we've forgotten. And so I've gone off on a tangent, but the reason I want to mention this is, to me, I think one of the biggest national security breaches has occurred with Russia, and a lot of people have forgotten this. It was May 2017. President Trump had a meeting in the Oval Office with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Mm-hmm. Now, it was first reported by the Post, later really extensively chronicled by Vanity Fair, that the president revealed very highly classified intel, apparently from Israel, about an ISIS plot to bomb airplanes. Now, this was a huge breach that required a lot of damage control. I mean, reportedly really threatened intel sharing between the U.S. and Israel. To me, this was really the line in the sand. I mean, President Trump didn't even allow U.S. media in, but he allowed Russian photographers. To me, I go back to my three scenarios here. You could say this is the deep state. Trump did not trust the intelligence agencies, American intelligence agencies. He certainly didn't trust the U.S. media to cover it. And he continued from then on to side with Vladimir Putin that Russia really did not interfere in the election. You, on the flip side, wonder, does Russia have, compromising information on Trump? But again, I think the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. He was number one. He was new to the office. He does not care for what he probably views as the stuffy protocols of, I need to have interpreters, I need to do this. No, I'm going to talk one-on-one. He's known for going off script. He's known for boasting. By many accounts, that's how this transpired. And I also think there's this element of defiance. You say, I can't deal with Putin this way. Well, I am going to. And so I'm not doing analogies today, Eric. I know you're very disappointed, but I am going to do a Dr. Phil armchair psychiatrist. I think from the get-go, President Trump has been very frustrated and angry and driven by the fact of all these questions of his legitimacy, whether he won. I mean, he did, but, that he hasn't gotten his due for executing, a huge upset. People were not expecting him to win. I think, he still can't admit that Hillary won the popular vote. I think this is shown in that bizarre preoccupation in the early months with the size of the inauguration crowd. I mean, that to me, I don't know what you thought as a journalist, but seeing Sean Spicer show a clearly crowded National Mall and a not crowded National Mall, I mean, journalists are going to be like a dog with a bone. What? Why are we needlessly discussing this when there's so many other important things? And I think Russia ties into all of this. It's anytime there's a suggestion that questions President Trump's legitimacy and saying, hey, Russia interfered to help you win, I think that really rankles the president. And of course, the White House pushes back and points out, correctly, that they have not only kept but increased sanctions on Russia. They provided Ukraine with lethal weaponry, which President Obama did not do. But I mean, you can't help but wonder how much Trump really supported this. And, I read the Foreign Affairs essay that former Vice President Biden wrote about Russia. To foreign policy wonks, it was just so beyond boilerplate. I mean, it's predictable. He's going to team up, Putin is a KGB thug. He's going to team up with allies and possible sanctions and so forth. I mean, it was nothing nobody had heard. I think the bigger question is, if Trump wins, will he finally feel unshackled by, this congressional opposition to any pro-Russia move and say, you know what, these are my next 4 years. I wasn't able to do it the first 4. I am going to engage Russia. I might, and it's a big if, withdraw from NATO, versus Biden, who says, I'm going to actually increase my cooperation with NATO to address the Russia problem. And so, I mean, in an odd way, Russia, to me, I think presents the starkest contrast between the two candidates moving forward for voters. So that was incredibly long, roundabout, where I said I wouldn't look back too much on 4 years, and I took 15 minutes looking back on 4 years. But Eric, what are some of your thoughts, not so much the past too, but also what's happening right now?
Anna, I completely agree with you in your final assessment that the president, if reelected, could go all in on this relationship with Russia. And in fact, I think what we will see tomorrow is, regardless of the outcome, President Donald Trump is going to lose the popular vote again.
Mhm.
So he will not be elected by the popular vote, and we know that's going to rankle him. Now, I don't believe that he will be dogged as much by questions about Russia as he has been these last 4 years, but they're still going to be there. And as a result of that, I think we're going to see the president move ever so closer to Russia as a result of that. And so I think that's why we see the president not only embrace people like Putin, Erdogan, or Kim Jong Un, but I think one of the reasons for that is because he feels that this is a place where he can be accepted is by autocratic leaders versus democratic leaders or Western allies. And so I think as a result of that, we're going to see the president move closer in that direction. And I think it's going to be a wholesale change of the landscape that the United States has forged for these last 6 or 7 decades. It's going to look very different. And President Donald Trump is going to not just shake up things, but he's going to totally, I think, annihilate what the United States has basically adhered to, which is engaging in foreign policy within the 40-yard lines. I think the president is going to not, I think he's going to literally blow up the playing field. Yeah. And so I think in a second term, we will see the president go all in on that. And I do believe that not only will the president get closer in his relationship to Vladimir Putin, but I think we will see the president very much in a second term attempt to mirror the exact same presidency of a Vladimir Putin. I think he will want to see the United States be Russia-like. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that, because all you have to do is look at how the president has finally learned how to wield the power and authority of the bureaucracy. And you see the president now beginning to bend that to his will. And I think we will see the president only continue in that thread.
So I think I wouldn't say I'll respectfully slightly disagree. I mean, I definitely think the institutional constraints these first 4 years, really prevented the president from, enacting the agenda that he wanted to. And I think Russia's a classic example. And we talked about this last time, and it's clear he's going to want to purge even more officials from the bureaucracy. I mean, there are already, loyalty tests left and right. I mean, just recently said Fauci would probably go. Again, it's going to be another test of the institutional safeguards. You can call it bureaucracy. I still think Congress, especially when it comes to Russia, will stand in the way. I don't foresee the president muzzling the media in this, or the opposition in this extreme way that Putin has. And I certainly don't see the president, President Trump trying to stay in office till 2036, like Putin technically now can. I think what you will see is more of a continuation of the subversion of democracy through, as you said, chipping away at career professionals. I mean, especially in foreign policy, State Department, but also Pentagon and other agencies. But also, of this, just I'll say it as a journalist, lying, I mean, just really lying in the face of reality, and that is to a point where we're so, we become so numb to it. But it continually from saying from the get-go that the election is going to be rigged. I mean, how long ago has the president said that? This will slowly erode the people's faith in democracy. Knowing if you have a president, words matter, who is constantly saying right off the bat without any evidence, it's rigged. And I think we both know it's not one of these predictions that is crazy to make, of no matter what, president's going to try and declare victory and challenge for the next few months what happens. So I think in that sense, yes, I mean, he's clearly chipped away at what we perceive as democracy. Do I think he's at a level of Putin where, I mean, when it comes to media, when it comes to, I mean, almost everything, business and so forth. I just still see that we're fundamentally so different from Russia. But I mean, you can talk about that, but I would love to get your opinion too on, we talk about Russia, how relevant truly is Russia? I think one of the biggest, I don't want to say misconceptions, but one of the things about Russia, certainly a lot of foreign policy pundits will say, well, look, we have exited the stage in Syria and the Middle East and so forth, and Russia is now in Syria, it's in Libya. Putin certainly has the ability to interfere in the elections, take advantage of this incredibly divisive period in our history, and sow chaos. There's no doubt about that. But, I kind of also think that Russia is weak. I mean, there have been good stories out there of how Biden is not even going to care about Russia, not just because of coronavirus. I mean, Russia has never innovated its economy. It's dependent on oil. It's hugely corrupt. You want to talk about Syria. Yeah, Russia is a kingmaker in Syria. But what about after the fact? You're going to need money to rebuild Syria. Russia's not going to pony up that money. He's going to want the U.S. to help. Do you think President Trump and an America First agenda is going to, sure, let me commit some money to rebuild Syria, which I wanted to get out of? I mean, and same thing now, Russia's preoccupied with all of the turmoil on its borders, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, you've got Armenia, Azerbaijan, all of this kind of post Soviet sphere is having all kinds of upheaval. So I don't know. I mean, we talk about Russia, and certainly I think, Trump will do in the next 4 years what he wanted to do in the first 4 years, but was hamstrung. But I don't really see, in an odd way, Russia being a huge priority for either candidate. I don't know. I mean, I think that's a possibility. What do you think, Eric?
And I'm so glad that you touched on this, Anna, because I think if there is one takeaway out of this webcast today, it is this piece that Russia is, in fact, a paper tiger. The only reason we give Russia the attention that we do is the same reason we give it to North Korea, because they got nuclear weapons. But you're right. They've got a faltering economy. They haven't been relevant on the global stage outside of Vladimir Putin's interference in any way, shape, or form. And as a result of that, it hasn't been able to move the needle in terms of where we're going in terms of our alliances. And I think that is something that doesn't really get the attention that it should. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why you see so much pushback at home for Vladimir Putin. And I think it's why we have to see him rule with such an iron fist, because he has been so colossally bad at managing their economy back home. And that's an issue that does not get the attention that it should. And I'm glad that we're actually having this conversation about Russia, because we do look at Russia as if it is the Soviet Union, circa the 70s and 80s, but right. it isn't. But we do give Vladimir Putin this outsized weight, this outsized influence, because he is able to poke his finger at things. And then even when we look at where Vladimir Putin is able to assert some level of influence, in Syria, as you said, in Venezuela, these are all failed countries. And these are countries that, quite frankly, Russia alone cannot help rebuild, regardless of the influence they have there. They're not going to like bring these countries back to the prominence that they experienced decades ago. But right now, what Russia is actually good at doing at this point is playing prevent defense from Western allies to be able to actually help rebuild some of these broken areas. And that's where Russia is able to continue to have an influence. And I think that's where Vladimir Putin thrives. And I think because you have someone like Donald Trump who does have the level of inexperience in these matters, he's able to exploit that. And I think with someone like Joe Biden, that will be much more difficult because, as you say, Joe Biden recognizes just how impotent Vladimir Putin is.
Hmm. I mean, and in his essay, which I kind of did criticize. I mean, that's one of the main points he makes is Russia is a shell of democracy. It's built on it's house of cards, whether it's the economy or politics. And I mean, like you said, it's a paper tiger. The real tiger is China. I mean, we see that militarily, economically, politically. And so yeah, I mean, I think this really does get to, Russia can certainly and has become skilled at, you know, of coming in and creating trouble. But this 2016 is not 2020. We know that even though, President Trump has questioned Russian meddling, intelligence agencies, DHS and other, they've been prepared. They've been working on it. They believe in it. And certainly this, I don't think, you're going to have this Facebook, social media companies. It's we're aware of the problem now, whereas there was really no huge awareness of it 4 years ago. And that I think is going to be a very critical difference. And I mean, like you said, I think on the flip side, I think what a lot of media and pundits miss is that Putin was, and to a degree still is genuinely popular. I mean, he's been in office like 20 years now, 20 years, I think. In the beginning, he was able to use the enormous profits off of, its energy industry to
Mm-hmm.
lift standards that, when Soviet Union collapsed, I mean, so did people's livelihoods. I mean, Soviet Union or Russia was initially, in dire straits. Putin, did come in, lift people's standards of living, and he had enormous popularity. I think, again, the media doesn't always recognize that. But again, he's been in office 20 years now. Oil prices have plummeted. People's standards of living have completely stagnated. Russia has a huge demographic challenge, which a lot of people don't, talk about. So the future is not bright. I don't know if I were a Russian president, I would want to stay on until 2036. I mean, at some point want to get off the scene. I mean, I think Putin wants stability, but like you said, the popularity that he has enjoyed, that veneer now with the lack of real innovation, real democracy is wearing thin. I don't
Mm-hmm.
see that trend changing. And so again, I mean, it kind of goes back to the point of will he be that hugely relevant to either candidate? I think Trump might also rhetorically, make some moves of, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But in the end, will it make a huge difference? I think the only time it will make a real difference is, I think the big issue, would he withdraw from NATO? I mean, it's something he has threatened to do. That would be, I mean, the foreign policy explosion that certainly our allies fear. I don't think he will ultimately be able to do it. I mean, he could, but that would create such pushback and such an uproar that I don't really see that happening in the next 4 years. And so I think, in terms of Russia, other than lifting sanctions, I don't think there's much that President Trump, at least for now, especially with the pandemic raging, could tangibly do. So, yeah, I mean, Russia's a threat, but are we over hyping it? If that makes sense. in an odd way,
Well,
whether it's a Biden or Trump administration.
Well, I think, the issue of the coronavirus is also going to play heavily in terms of where the United States and Russia go, both individually and collectively. Because remember, the United States has already pulled out of an agreement to work with the World Health Organization on confronting the virus. That's number one. Number two, both the United States and Russia are two of the leading nations of contracted cases. And so we're already seeing the limits to the leadership of both Putin and Trump in handling this major health crisis. And so this could, I think, it's already threatening Russia in ways that Putin, I think, is working overtime to try to ensure that outside media is not aware of. But also with the cases continuing to rise in the United States, at some point, this is also going to really damper and hinder our GDP, our ability, our economic output. And I think that could pose problems for a second term of the Trump administration, where he may want to really develop that relationship with Vladimir Putin. But I think until both of these leaders actually get a handle on that crisis, I think the situation could determine for them the outcome of where these two respective countries go, if in fact they don't really get in front of this issue.
Yeah. And I mean, that is certainly the running theme of everything. It's not that foreign policy is not important, but no matter who wins tomorrow, a week from tomorrow, or what have you.
A week? Oh my gosh.
You're on the shorter time frame. I'm on the longer time frame. We're gonna see how it pans out. I'm not making any predictions.
Well, I will make this prediction.
That didn't work out for people 4 years ago.
This is the prediction I make. If we still do not have a winner in a week, Vladimir Putin will be running the country by 2021.
You're on the record. I'm gonna say no about the thing. I'm sure there'll be some interesting. You know what? And there was a good. I forget where I read it, but kind of a calm down advice in general for voters. You're not going to know Tuesday night. Don't buy into everything you see on social media. Don't think that if you see unrest in certain areas, it's nationwide. Like, I think perhaps this is a good way to kind of end it, of stay calm. Maybe we'll learn from the Brits, stay calm and carry on. Like you said, anxiety is, oh my gosh, through the roof. But, our democracy has withstood a lot of tests. And hopefully this, come 2021, we will have, between the pandemic, racial justice movement, this incredibly divisive political environment, maybe we will showcase the best of what we're made of as a country. So that's my positive note. But we'll see when we do a webcast in 2 weeks. What I really say.
We may be doing it from Moscow.
Again, Moscow will be watching. Yeah, I'll give you that one.
Yeah, but on a serious note, you're right. I mean, and we also, and also for our viewers, especially those who are watching overseas, we have to remind everyone that America is still an experiment. America is still an ideal, and as an experiment, we're still trying to figure out the right elixirs and how to put them all together. And we're seeing that play out in real time. Today, tomorrow, and in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I mean, we are tested like everyone else with beyond rapidly changing world. I mean, that sounds so cliche. I mean, we've taken what were changes over history, and they've exponentially, whether it's AI, pandemics, we are faced with enormous challenges. So, we'll get through it. Knock on wood. Did you hear me knock on wood? I do.
Oh, I was afraid that was the cat.
They haven't been bugging me lately. So apparently, I don't think they're fans of China or Russia.
Oh, Russia.
Don't worry, they'll come out for post-election analysis. But so on that note, hopefully this was an informative but lighthearted break before the dun dun dun.
Oh yeah, Russia, lighthearted. Okay. Talk about a play on words. Got it.
Putin. such a lighthearted character. But anyway, but we're gonna have a lot more. We'll have especially Eric's expertise, because you are going to be in the weeds with all of this political analysis. So
no sleep.
No. That's what, Nespresso is I'm doing a plug for Nespresso. That's my favorite coffee. So it's going to be interesting times as always. But then also we're going to continue to look at foreign policy, which of course is not going to be at the top of everyone's minds, but the world does not stop churning. So also we hope that will offer helpful information. And we are going to be podcasting. You can listen to us if you don't want to necessarily see us, even though we look pretty good, I think, but to each their own. If you want to just listen to us, we are setting it up, and you can go on our website, or you can go on Apple, Android, just search for Global 360. You'll be able to find us. We are finally starting that process. If you prefer the webcast, of course, to see our faces, you can subscribe to the Washington Diplomat's YouTube channel. You can always go to our website, watchdiplomat.com, for information on both. So there's no excuse not to listen to us or watch us, or both. And once again, want to, of course, thank our sponsors, Cigna, health services company that operates worldwide, as well as Sahori Insurance, which has been serving the diplomatic community for 50 years. And as always, thank you, Eric, for lively conversation. It's a nice break from the headlines and the up to the minute analysis, which can get pretty overwhelming. So we will be talking, we'll be seeing, we'll be comparing predictions.
Right. From our respective bunkers. Bye, everyone.
With the cats. And there's the joys of Zoom right there. A live, old school landline. Okay. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining us. Please stay tuned. There's going to be so much more to cover up ahead. Thank you.